It became very popular. The South Carolinian was a prophet. He truly was. A newspaper that first year took note of Mountain House and wrote, "A few families have already discovered this charming resort the first year it has been opened and are boarding steadily with Mr. McGregor." Now, it was not just Mountain House. They used the word resort. That is a little grandiose. But here's what we had when I was in charge of this mountaintop. As well as Mountain House, guests could play croquet. They could go on walks through the woods that were lined with white stones. Now, I know this sounds odd, but on moonlit nights, those paths outlined by those little white stones were absolutely magical. And I can tell you, the young couples from Saratoga learned about them very quickly. More on that in a moment. We had a cookhouse that was separate from Mountain House. Mrs. Sprott, otherwise known as my sister Margaret, was the cook. She also designed an elaborate garden. Now, I do not speak French. I'd probably mispronounce it. Portrayal, I don't know how to say it, but I know it was beautiful. Gardens of this sort are laid out in sweeping geometric patterns. I think if you ever see paintings of Versailles, the palace at Versailles, of the gardens, we were not Versailles by any means, but that is the sort of ornamental garden I'm speaking of, and my sister designed those gardens. Our cuisine. We had fresh fish because I was and still am a part owner of the Moreau Pond. We pulled, the fish were wonderful, let me just leave it at that. And we advertised for the city dwellers who came up to the racetrack in the summer, we advertised that we had milk, butter, mountain berries, crisp potatoes, tea and coffee with genuine cream. This seemed to make a difference to the New Yorkers. On our property, 3 lakes. All right, they were ponds, but I called them lakes. We had Lake Anna, named for my niece. We had Lake Bonita, where you could rent little boats. We had lilies growing on Lake Bonita, and many of the young ladies liked to go out and pick the lilies. We also had Artists Lake. There was something about this area that attracted artists. They found this mountaintop absolutely fascinating and lovely. And to a large degree it still is. That has not been spoiled. Well, we became so popular, there was a regular stagecoach run from Saratoga. One of my logging roads I opened up to take carriages and the stagecoach. So we became a regular stop on the line. Now, getting back to those young couples. This became the place where the young men and the young ladies came a-courting, and I began to be able to spot the young men who were about to pop the question. There's something about a young man when he is sweating and nervous that just stands out. And in those delicate romantic moments, I would send out to the young couple refreshments. Lemonade for her, and what appeared to be milk for him. Milk with a little Scotch whiskey mixed in. Young men need bracing up at moments like that. I like to think I did my bit for Cupid. Well, Mountain House did very well for 3 years, and then I had visitors of a very different sort. The leader of this organization was W.J. Arkell of the Canajoharie Arkells. You may be familiar with the name. He's a meat packer, a publisher. He's a co-owner of the Albany Journal, the Albany Evening Journal. Yes, he's also an ex-state senator. Mr. Arkell is a very wealthy man. And he brought along a group of very wealthy friends. Now, I toured them around the mountain. And Arkell said something to the effect that he thought this was the most beautiful place in America he had ever seen. And one of his colleagues then turned to him and said, "W.J., why don't you build a railroad to this place?" Now, W.J. Arkell, I learned later, loved railroads. He was into many businesses. One of them was railroads. This gentleman that raised the question was a Mr. Kellogg from Amsterdam. And he immediately, Mr. Kellogg, immediately pledged $25,000 for the construction of a railroad. Mr. Arkell pledged $25,000. I learned later he contacted his father and his brother. They pledged $25,000. And then Mr. Arkell approached his business partner, Joseph Drexel. Again, you may know the name. He's a very wealthy man into many enterprises. He also threw in a great deal of money, and in the end, Mr. Arkell had $1 million to work with. I knew what they were aiming at. They were thinking that they were going to build a great hotel on my mountaintop and use that little train to service it from Saratoga. I toyed with these gentlemen. I sold them the rights to the railroad, but I would not immediately sell them the rights to the mountaintop. I thought, Mountain House could use a railroad to its front door. Why not? And I saw Mr. Arkell at work. This man had contacts. Being a former state senator, I'm not surprised. He quickly had the state legislature approve a charter for what was called the Saratoga, Mount McGregor, and Lake George Railroad. They never did push on to Lake George, but they had it in the back of their minds. And Mr. Arkell waited for nothing. Once he had that document in his hand, the railroad was chartered in February 1882. The ground was broken in March, and the railroad was finished by July. 10 miles straight as an arrow from Saratoga, and then it wound up the mountain. The depot, as you can see, is right there, virtually at our front door. And I still toyed with them. I was not immediately going to sell the top of the mountain. For those of you interested in such things, it was a narrow gauge railway. As you can see, it looks like a toy compared to the great engines down in the valley. Narrow gauge railway. The incline coming up the mountain. I talked to the engineer who designed the railroad. 4.1% of incline. I'm not sure how to interpret that. Anyway, it rises 212 feet per mile. If any of you have come up on the little railroad, you know it passes over hair-raising ravines at a very steep angle. It is a thrill ride to get here. It takes 40 minutes to ascend the mountain. Now, in the advertising that eventually came out for the hotel, Mr. Arkell and Mr. Drexel, who was his chief partner, they portrayed the railroad as something that was death-defying to take that ride. It was fun, but it was not death-defying. The gentleman that designed that railroad, he was an Irishman, John McGee. He had built railroads in the Andes Mountains. To him, this was child's play. But it looked good in the advertising. All right, the railroad was finished. I took advantage of it for a season. And then I finally agreed to sell the rest of my mountain to Mr. Arkell and Mr. Drexel. They made me a partner in their organization. I will not tell you how much I sold the mountain for. It is none of your business, but I did very well. Thank you very much. And as a partner, I took a very great interest in what Mr. Drexel and Mr. Arkell were doing. Mountain House originally stood at the summit of the mountain. They put Mountain House on great log rollers and rolled it down the slope to here, stabilized it, and had workmen live here while they constructed the Balmoral Hotel. Now the Balmoral Hotel, well, it opened just last year in 1884. As you can see, it is state-of-the-art, state-of-the-art. 1,200 feet above sea level, so we do have very fresh air up here when Saratoga is sweltering. One of the advertising brochures for the Balmoral, as follows. A few years have made a marked change in the aspect of the summit of Mount McGregor without destroying the natural beauty of the landscape. A large, handsome, and well-managed hotel now affords ample and pleasant accommodations for 300 boarders, and an elegant restaurant is open to transient visitors who come merely to spend a few hours in this delightful resort. Let me tell you a little more. You can just look at the hotel and you can count that there's 4 stories. That's obvious. What is not so obvious at a glance is that the porches on the hotel, they call them piazzas. They're a little fancier than porches. The piazzas are 22 feet wide. One wing of the hotel is 340 feet long. The rooms, as you would expect, are powered by gas, but, did I say feet? I meant to say yards. 340 yards long. It's an immense building. It's immense. If you look closely, you will see very odd-looking light fixtures out on the piazza. These are powered by electricity, these lights. It is the Edison system. There's a young man who came up here to help install the generator for the electrical system. You may hear of him in the future. His name is Thomas Edison. Sharp as a tack. He tells me that his shop may be moving to Schenectady in the near future. Brilliant, brilliant. There is, as you can see, something like a spotlight, almost a light like you would see in a lighthouse on the tower of the hotel. That has the equivalent of 1,200 candle power. 1,200 candle power. That light can be seen at night in Glens Falls, and it wouldn't be, I think you can see it in Albany at night. It is blindingly bright. The tall column you've probably been wondering about, that was a derrick that was used to drill an artesian well. It stands 90 feet tall, and Mr. Arkell and Mr. Drexel left it in place as an observation tower. You can take the circular staircase to the top, and from that spot, I am telling you, the view from the overlook is wonderful, but from that tower, you think you are in the neighborhood of heaven. It is, if you can climb that tower, please do. You won't be disappointed. There's now an art gallery connected with the hotel, and the more artists, the better is my motto. Another brochure published just this spring. When it is hot everywhere else, the visitor at the Hotel Balmoral will find a cool and refreshing air pervading rooms and inviting an undisturbed repose. No dew, no malaria, no mosquitoes, certain relief from hay fever. Well, I don't know about the hay fever, but I can tell you we do get a few mosquitoes here occasionally. Last year when they opened, 1884, their manager was a Mr. Cutler, and I thought he was first rate. He was replaced this spring by a Mr. Fonda, and I do take great interest in the hotel, and I'm going to be blunt. Things have gone downhill under Mr. Fonda.